We used to have these big family reunions every summer in the campgrounds in Nottingham, Oregon. This was more of a tradition in the 1990s, but as the kids got older, we stopped doing it anyway. After a long drive and a flight, we would all get there on Friday. Then, on Saturday, we'd have a huge family cookout. We were going to stay until Sunday night. Then everyone would either stay in hotels or get on planes to go home. Well, it was Friday night around 10 o'clock, and most of us, if not all of us, had just finished setting up our tents and getting all of our gear ready. We were mixing and mingling, talking, hanging out, and seeing family members we hadn't seen in over a year. Since we were all about the same age at this time, this is when I would usually go see my cousins and play with them. There were 5 of us, me, my older cousin Ryan, who is 2 years older than I am, Sarah, who is 3 years older than I am, David, who is 2 years younger than I am, and a girl named Sarah. And Jess is older than me by 5 years. Those aren't their real names, of course. But for the sake of the story, you get the idea. We decided to go play in the woods while the adults talked, drank beer, and had fun on their first night together after not seeing each other for a long time. For a kid, it's a magical place to go play in the woods, surrounded by white bark, pine, and Douglas firs. It's easy to get lost in these magical woods. Oregon is the place to go when you think of the Pacific Northwest in A. Even though I said it was about 10 p.m., it was already getting dark. I don't think it was quite 10 p.m., because it was still bright enough that you needed a flashlight, but it wasn't completely dark yet. Since this happened in July, I know that it doesn't really get dark until at least 10. So, we're out in the woods, and we've decided to play hide and seek. Even though I was almost the youngest, after I count to 60, I go look for my cousins, and I find all of them. But before I find David, I could have sworn I saw him hiding behind one of the bigger pine trees on a small ridge. I see this person hiding behind a tree, and I laugh at him. Got you. He didn't move, though. So I thought he just didn't care about me. And that's how I got back to the tree where I counted to 60 the first time. As me and my cousins talked more, David came out of his hiding place a little ways away. I was very angry with him because he didn't come out when I called him, and he looked at me like he didn't understand what I meant when I said I had never found him. I told them I had found him right behind that tree up there, near that ridge. He just shook his head and said, "No, that's not me." I thought that was strange, but at the time I just thought he was trying to trick me. So I just said it didn't matter. I kept going until about 11 p.m. We made s'mores, sat around a campfire, talked, laughed, had a good time, and then went to bed. The next day, we had a lot of fun, did things as a family, and hung out with friends. You know, all the usual things that families and kids do when they go camping. As the afternoon wore on, I'd say it was about 3:45 p.m. we all decided to go play again in the woods when it was much lighter out. We were going to play the same game, but I wasn't going to be it. In this case, I told Ryan to be it so he could Canada 60 while the rest of us found pine trees to hide behind and ran behind them. I decided that I wanted to be the last person found. So I ran back as far as I could and ran up the small ridgeline, where I thought I saw David yesterday standing behind the tree. Of course, I had completely forgotten about it at this point. So I pushed my way back there even further, and as I was going, the forest floor collapsed on me. It probably falls about 5 feet into a small hole that leads down into a tunnel at an angle of about 80 degrees. I fell on my behind, and it hurt like hell. I quickly pulled myself out of the 5-foot hole, and as I did so, I saw something big come out of the tunnel and land on the ground. I was still trying to get over the shock of falling into the hole. What I saw when I came out of that tunnel was like a bad dream. I can't even begin to describe how horrible and messed up this white face looked. It was very scary. It looked like dead eyes and bits of rotting flesh were reaching out to me. I just screamed as loud as I could, pushed my way out of the hole, and ran as fast as I could back to my cousins. I no longer cared about playing hide and seek. I didn't care if nobody found me. The camping trip didn't interest me at all. Not even the cookout. I really wanted to get out of that thing in the tunnel. I jumped down from the ridge and ran to my cousins, who were now coming out of their hiding places with curious looks on their faces, wondering why their youngest or second youngest cousin was screaming his head off and having a full-blown panic attack. I told him everything that had happened and everything I had seen. Ryan decided to go see what was going on for himself. So he and my other cousins went back, but I told him not to because it wasn't safe, and I wouldn't go back. So I think Ryan went back to being Ryan. About 4 or 5 minutes later, he comes back shaking his head. He saw the hole in the ground and what looked like a tunnel going down, but he didn't see anything coming out of the hole or going into the tunnel. But he also told me that he didn't look for very long and that he wouldn't jump down into the hole to look further into the tunnel. I was pretty scared, and I didn't want to just believe that what I saw was all in my head, but my cousins were very kind. I told them I wanted to go back to camp and that I was done being in the forest for the night. So we all go back to camp, and my family can clearly see that I'm upset and bothered by something. So they started to ask me what was wrong and what had happened. And I tell them that I just saw a big bear in the forest. It scared me, but everyone just laughs and says, "Yeah, there are black people around here. You have to be careful and keep the cookout going." Well, he had been sitting on the bench for a few more hours, so it was probably around 7 or 8 p.m. I remember because it was getting dark outside and I think all of my cousins were asking me if I wanted to go play again, which I said no to because of what had happened earlier. I think I'll just stay here and do nothing, which they understood. They went to the woods to play. I think they are playing hide and seek, but I don't know. But nobody told me. It hadn't been that long, so I don't even think it was 30 minutes later. But Ryan and Sarah do come back, and from the looks on their faces, I can tell they are both scared. They both tell me, "We believe you, we saw what you saw." They call what we saw a deer zombie thing. I'm not sure what we saw, though. I don't even know where to start describing it. It was very scary, and looked like something out of a child's nightmare. I didn't look at it long enough to figure out what it was, but after they told me what they saw, I knew it was the same thing. While I was sitting on the bench, they were playing in the woods. They all went to check out the same hole that had been there before. The one I fell into also had a tunnel, and they said that as they went around the hole, they could see something climbing up under the tunnel and coming towards them. When they saw it, they all screamed and ran away. My other 2 cousins were probably hiding in the tent because they were scared as crap. At first, I didn't believe him. I thought they were just making fun of me to make me feel better. But when I asked them to tell me what they saw, they did it much better than I did. That's how I knew what they saw. My uncle came over and saw that we were all scared. He sat down next to me and my cousins for a while and started talking to us. I can't listen in on their talk. But then, a little while later, I saw him talking to other people in my parents' house. Later that night, my dad came to my tent and asked me, "Son, is there a big black bear back in the woods that's scaring you guys? You have to watch out here. Black bears won't really hurt you, but if you get too close, they can. You shouldn't mess with bears, so be careful." After that, It was Sunday, and we decided not to go into the woods but to just chill out. By Sunday night, we were on our way out, and that was pretty much the end of my camping trip. So zombie deer monster in the deep woods of Nottingham, Oregon, let's not meet again. Between 2011 and 2014, before I moved, I went hiking all over the Adirondacks in New York State. In fact, me and my friends became pretty good outdoorsmen. We spent a lot of time in the wild and learned as much as we could about survival by reading books and watching shows about it. We even did our own survival test to see how long we could stay out there with only a few supplies and still stay alive. At one point, I made it about 6 days, but that was enough for me. I think that, in addition to being crazy, it was just me enjoying the outback and how peaceful and calm nature can be. Even though almost all of my camping and outdoor experiences were good, I only had one bad one, and it stands out. I'm going to tell you about that today. This happened in the summer of 2013, about a year before I moved. I was alone because I did a lot of hiking and camping by myself. It was what I was used to at the time. I was hiking on a dirt road that wasn't very busy and wasn't even used that often. From this dirt road, there were also a number of popular game trails that led to older logging roads that were no longer used. This is how camping in the wilderness should be done. I brought everything I would need to live on my own for 5 days, just in case I got lost or ran into some rough terrain. I wasn't going in a straight line. I was exploring in a general way, but I was looking for a nearby link that told me to bring enough food and water. I brought along several packages of beef jerky and bottles of water. I had everything I needed to stay kosher for the next few days, but things didn't change until the first night. I found the lake in the end. It was about 5 p.m. I took my one-person tent, had a small cookout, and even caught a trout that I ate for dinner. It was tasty, so I sat by the fire and enjoyed the peace and quiet of the lake. Then, around 8 or 9 p.m., I put out my fire and went back to my tent. And as I'm going to sleep, I hear what sounds like a man screaming bloody murder. Not very far. I know that about a half-mile from this lake, there is an old logging road that has been closed off. In fact, one of the ways I got here was by following a game trail. From where I was, the scream sounded like it was going up and down that road over and over again, but in rhythmic patterns, like someone kept screaming and screaming. Then it would stop and start up again. It would start, stop, and then sort of change pitch and timbre. I remember lying there and thinking, what animal makes that noise? I was completely confused and tried to match the strange sound I was hearing to every animal I could think of, but it sounded too human. Like it could be anything I knew. I've heard wolves, bears, and all kinds of other animals, even when they were in trouble, but none of them sounded like this. I guess you could say it was a mountain lion, but even mountain lions don't sound as strange as this. I want to point out that I could tell from the noise that whatever was making it had to be pretty big. This was because of how loud it was and how much bass was in its voice. You could feel it, which made my stomach feel very bad. The noise stopped after a while, and I was able to sleep. The next morning, I tried to go on a few short hikes to see what I could find while keeping my camp near the lake. I didn't find or see anything unusual. So, I went fishing in the afternoon and evening, caught a few more trout, and again had shot for dinner, which I ate with a can of beans. I had eaten so much that I fell asleep while sitting by the fire. It was just right. So, once more, I decided it was time to call it quits, climb into my tent, and go to sleep. This time, I woke up in the middle of the night to the same screaming sound as the night before. This time, though, it was on the other side of the lake and much closer than before. Even though it was still on the other side of the lake, This sound sounded like it was getting closer to the tent. And for the first time, I'm starting to feel unsafe because I don't know what's making this sound, and I can't think of any animal that could make it, and I can't even make it myself. It sounded like something from a scary movie, but keep in mind that I never once thought of Bigfoot or another monster. I just thought it was an animal in trouble or something else going on. I think things through very well. There had to always be a reason why things happen the way they do. But for this, I couldn't say anything. Just like the first night, the sound stopped after a while, and I was able to go back to sleep. Now that it's the third morning, I get up, use my percolator to make coffee over the fire, wake up, stretch, and go on a day hike. This time, I thought it would be best to check out the other side of the lake, where I had heard the screams before. So that's where I walked to get to. You have to walk over a lot of old brush and fallen trees. So it took me roughly an hour to get there. And when I did, I was surprised to see these huge footprints in the soft mud along the lake's edge. I didn't have a ruler or a cell phone on me. I mean, even if I did, I wouldn't be able to use my cell phone anyway. But they could have been between 17 and 18 inches long and maybe 5 inches wide. They stood up straight and were very tall and thin. They kind of curved back and got thinner toward the heel, and the feet split into 3 big toes with clear claw marks. They walked in a back and forth pattern up to the shore and then back to where the rocks were and up into the trees. It looked like something came down from the tree line, went to the shore, and then went back up into the tree line. I'm sure it was heavy. At least half an inch was taken out of the surface. I had to be careful not to get stuck in the mud, which was pretty soft, but last night I saw something big walking around here. I didn't know what to think at all. I don't know of any two-legged animals out here. I know apes exist, but they're the only other animal I can think of that walks on 2 legs. There aren't any apes out here, and ape prints don't look like this. This almost made me think of a big bird or lizard, and I can't for the life of me figure out why the prince was 2-legged instead of 4-legged based on his size alone. That was also strange, but I tried not to let it bother me, so I kept hiking for the rest of the day and came back in the evening. Where, instead of fishing like the last 2 nights, I thought I'd just eat a couple of protein bars and the rest of my beans. After that, it was time for bed. So, I got into my sleeping bag and got ready for round 3. Eventually, I fell asleep. But I was very nervous and couldn't wait for something to happen. I have no idea why. It was just something I felt. I remember how the crickets and other sounds of the forest were much quieter than usual that night. The last 2 nights, crickets were out and about. I mean, I almost didn't sleep the first night there. They made a lot of noise. But everything was just too quiet that night. It was a hard night to sleep through. I would wake up, fall back asleep, wake up, and then fall back asleep again and again because it was so quiet around the lake. Then, at some point in the very early morning, probably around 4 or 5 p.m. just as the sun was beginning to come up. I thought I heard something heavy walking around my camp, but I can't be sure. So, I wake up around 6 a.m., get up, and look around. The same footprints I saw by the shoreline the day before are over by my camp, probably about 100 feet away and running parallel to the tree line. Since I'm more than 100 feet from the actual tree line, now is when I start to worry that something else is in the room with me. I don't know if it's a plant eater or a meat eater, but it's a big animal. I, too, can remember that day. I thought I'd just hang out at the lake and not hike as much. I just felt unsafe and uncertain from the blood in the morning through the afternoon, evening, and into tonight. I try to calm my nerves by fishing for most of the day. So, that night, I thought, maybe if I stay up a little later than usual by the fire, I'll get a chance to see whatever this thing is, and that will put my mind at ease. So I had the fire going full blast. I stayed up late, had fun, and listened to the night. Even though the crickets were still there, they were not as loud as they had been. And as time went on, they got quieter and quieter, so they finally stopped. But I didn't notice it right away. Then, I heard something very heavy moving around behind the fire and coming toward me. I started to feel very anxious and nervous. I feel like I might be in danger in the pit of my stomach. The footsteps made me feel the same way you would if a bear came into your campsite at night. Whatever it was, the more I listened, the more it sounded like it had 2 legs. There was a lot of fighting going on, but the moon was hidden by clouds, so it was very dark, and the only light I could see was from the fire. Everything that was out of reach of the fire was pretty much pitch black. I had my flashlight, but part of me didn't want to risk shining it on something I didn't want to see or would regret seeing, if you know what I mean. But I had a small pistol with me just in case. When you're traveling in the outdoors, you never know when you might run into trouble. So I always kept that close to me, but I started to get more and more nervous, and this feeling in my stomach kept getting worse and worse. That's when I started hearing footsteps getting closer and closer. They started out far away by the tree line, but now it sounded like they were slowly going down the slope toward my camp, but not all at once. It would be like taking a few steps, stopping, waiting a while, taking a few more steps, stopping, waiting a while, and then taking a few more steps. And this went on for at least 30 to 45 minutes. It seemed like whatever it was trying to be as quiet and sneaky as possible so it wouldn't be heard, which made me even more worried. At one point, I could hear this thing just 20 feet from my tent, near the fire. I couldn't see it, but I knew it was there because I could hear it. At some point, I took out my gun and shot 3 times into the air. After that, everything went well, and I just sat there and waited and waited. And maybe in 30 to 60 minutes, there will be nothing but silence. The crickets start to come back. I never heard this thing climb back up to the tree line, it's just dead quiet. I fell asleep in my camping chair, and when I woke up, it was morning and my fire was still going. When it was light outside, that was pretty scary. I got up from my chair and looked at all my things. Nothing had been touched. But there are these big prints, the same ones, on the other side of the lake and up by the tree line. They were about 20 feet away from where I was the day before. Maybe 10 feet away from where the fire is coming from. And you could see that they kind of zigzagged down from the tree line to where the tent was. You could also see that they went right back up, though I never heard it go back up. That gave me chills, and I was more than a little scared, so I broke down my camp and decided to try to find a different place to camp for the rest of the day. After taking everything apart, I hiked back to the old logging road and went to the other side, which was probably another 4-mile hike. That night, I set up my tent in a small meadow where things seemed much calmer and nicer. However, I swore at one point or another that I heard the same scream from far away, but maybe I was just being paranoid. The next day, I went back to the real world. Like I said before, that was really the only bad thing that happened to me while I was hiking. All the others have been good, so I'm pretty sure that whatever was out there with me wasn't friendly. This was my first time at a camp where you stay overnight. I wasn't too happy about being away from home for the whole summer. But luckily, it got off to a good start for me. It was the end of my first week at camp, on Friday night. So, all of the campers gathered around the fire pit to sing songs around the fire before going back to their cabins. Most of us went back to our cabins, and everyone did. There were some cabins, E and F, in the girls' cabin. For us boys, our cabins were A and B depending on how many kids were in each one. Each cabin could hold about 8 to 10. I was in cabin B with all the other teenage boys. Only about 8 people were in cabin A. I think the counselor also slept there because they didn't have enough cabins for counselors. So, we're getting ready for bed, and as most of us do, we're laying down and joking around. And as I think most of us were settling down in bed and getting ready to sleep, he said, "It's time to go." We heard rustling in the bushes outside the cabin, then frantic pounding on the door and a very scared sound. Let me in now," so we all kind of stopped talking in bed and looked around. One of the boys got out of bed and opened the door. It was one of the cabin boys, who was completely white and scared. "Someone was trying to get into the cabin," he said. "This tall, big figure." I tried to get the door open. He said a person couldn't have done it. It was huge, wide, and had a lot of hair, which scared him a lot. Some of us laughed at him, and others just tried to figure out what he meant. We decided that the best thing to do would be to go get the counselor. So, except for maybe 3 or 4 of us, most of us walked over to cabin A, where many of the other boys were, and they were also scared. No one from the council was there. So, at this point, I and the other boys in my cabin were thinking, okay, this is obviously a very elaborate, well-planned joke the counselor played on us, but before we could even start to think about where he was gone. The boys in cabin A just kept yelling because they were scared of something. They kept saying the same thing that the other boy did, which was that this thing tried to break into the cabin by banging on the windows and shaking the door handle. They said it looked like a big gorilla. It was this guy in some kind of big suit. They were terrified to death. All of them were shaking, so we might have thought, okay, either something really did happen or the counselor is really playing a joke on us. So, we all left the boys in cabin A. And we decided to try to find the counselor by going there. We get out of cabin A. We're on our way back to cabin B and then we see another counselor come in after the first one. They both have handguns, and are speaking to us in a very serious tone. Get back to your cabin, boys. We're in trouble now? And the two people from cabin A, who were with me, ran back to cabin A. We few people from cabin B, most of us, though, ran back to cabin B. I'm one of them. Some people stayed behind to try to talk to him, but he wouldn't listen. He told us all to go back to our cabins because something was wrong. So we returned to cabin B. Some of us are scared, but the rest of us are just trying to laugh it off and everything is fine. This is just some big joke. No worries. Let's just go to bed. This isn't a big deal at all. Then we hear gunshots, bam bam, which is a very scary sound. We all jump up right away. We think that something went wrong. So we run out of the house to see Cap, but A is too far away for us to see anything. But when we hear screaming, many of us or some of us run to cabin A, where the counselors are standing and pointing into the night. The men in the cabinet are going crazy. When he sees us, he yells at us. I thought I told you guys to go back to your cabins, but then we heard this horrible scream coming from the woods. I thought it was a demon. It almost made me poop my pants. So, we all ran screaming back to cabin B, where we huddled together until it got light. Didn't really know what would happen. The night was so quiet it was scary. There are no more crickets, sounds, or gunshots. The counselor didn't come by to see how we were doing. At our cabin, we didn't see anything else. Even though we didn't hear anything, I think we were all pretty scared after hearing that roar, which you couldn't have missed. Even the boys who had to stay in this cabin heard the roar. It was loud, so I'm guessing that most of us didn't get much sleep that night. When morning finally came, it felt like it would never come. We got out of the cabin. When it was time for breakfast at 7, the counselor, the boys from Group A, and all the girls were there. Even the girls asked what that loud noise was. They, too, had heard her. When we tried to ask the boys from cabin A about it, they wouldn't talk about it, and when we asked the counselor about it, he said it's not up for discussion and seemed pretty upset about the whole thing. He stuttered more. He was very pale, he looked kind of sick, and you could tell something was just very wrong, but he was trying as hard as he could to be professional and press onward with the daily camp activities. It took several days, maybe an entire week after that, for things to return to somewhat normal, if you could even call that even remotely normal. But eventually everything did die down and calm down. But that will hands down always be the most frightening experience I've ever had while camping. I was walking around with my friend and it was roughly 8 p.m. at night. We were just talking, stopping to take breaks. We loved our night hikes. We had heard something though that sounded like footsteps not too far away from us. We got nervous with it being dark outside. There's no reason anybody would be out walking around, especially without a light out here in the woods, and unfortunately our flashlights kept going out. The sound continued for about 30 more seconds and we keep hearing it on and off, was getting closer, closing the distance, wrestling through the trees. My friend tried to explain it away by saying that someone was just going back to their campsite or cabin in a casual way, but there was nothing like that out here. We had walked about a mile to get to our campsite, but why would anyone be this far away? It all made no sense. There were no roads or places to park cars. We were just exploring the deep woods, to be exact. It was later at night, so why would someone be out here by themselves following us while this was happening? You can only think of bad things. So, we walked a little farther, thinking that maybe the sounds would stop, but they didn't. Instead, they kept closing it on us at different times, so my friend and I decided it would probably be best to go back to avoid any problems. We ran as fast as we could all the way back to our tent, hoping to be safe since the figure or whoever it was in the trees didn't follow us once we started running. In fact, I think they wanted us to leave. I don't know if someone had a cabin nearby and was trying to get us to leave, but whoever it was got their way, and that was the last time my camping friends and I went exploring in the woods at night on a trail with little light. Yeah, I regret it. I used to go hiking and camping with my friends a lot when I lived in Idaho. Man, I'll tell you, there were nights when we made the best burger kebabs. But when I finished high school, I thought it was time for a change. Many people do the same thing when they leave high school, but what I did during those summer months is something I'll never forget. I've made some of my best memories outside, but today I want to tell you about one that really scared me. I went camping with some friends in a camper Chanel. When you go out into the wild, you have to be ready for anything because you don't know what could happen. So, that's why we took a lot of everyday things with us on our trip. We had food, water, gear, flashlights, machetes, and many other useful things. My iPhone was more important than all of those. Bringing your phone won't hurt. It could help you find your way if you get lost. You need help, and that's just what happened. I don't usually believe in ghosts or strange things, but this has made me think differently. One night, My friend woke me up around 2 a.m. and told me that she had heard voices talking to her outside the tent. I didn't at first believe her, but she kept insisting that it was true. I got up with her to find out what was going on. After that, it wasn't long. We had just left the tent when we heard voices. They were whispering, but it sounded like they were chanting or something similar, which was really creepy. At first, I thought someone from the other nearby campsite had woken up for some reason. We looked around more closely, and it seemed like no one was even awake. That's why my friend told me she wanted to try to get closer to the voices. She thought it would be better to take out her phone and try to record the sounds, like she had seen in real movies. I didn't want to really try to do that. This is a pretty scary thing that really happened. I got her phone for her, and we both started walking in the direction of where we heard the chanting. It was not a normal camping trip, by any means. As we get closer, our lights start to flicker on and off, making it harder for us to see anything. Suddenly, the chanting stopped, and there was silence. We kept walking in the direction of the sound until our flashlights turned back on. There seemed to be some kind of electronic interference, and it looked like the sun was moving all over the place. We couldn't figure out what was going on. The chanting sounds like it's coming from more and more distance. From where we were standing, it looked like the sun was moving. It sounded like it was right next to us, but when we took a few steps forward, we could see shadows moving in the woods toward us. We were frightened. So we went back to our tents and decided to call it a night. We could hear the night getting quieter and what sounded like a lot of movement all around our tent. After that, though, we didn't hear much more. The next morning, we decided right away to move to a different area. Not really. That's what I did when I went camping. Even if it's not that great, it's still interesting. Nonetheless, when a few of my friends and I went camping, this really did happen. It wasn't too far from Yellowstone National Park, but it wasn't in the park either. So, we're camping in the woods and having a good time with each other. So, after a few days, maybe 3 or 4, we decided to go exploring in the woods, because what else is there to do when you're camping? Besides hiking, I like to hang out, eat good food, and look around to see what's going on. Here's what's frightening. We came to a small clearing with saplings that were broken, bent, and twisted in all kinds of weird ways. My friend and I talked about what might be in these, but we weren't sure. Around the area, there are other strange marks made with stones that were stacked about 7 to 8 feet high. It was really weird. I've heard of people stacking rocks as a hobby before, but never in this way. Some of these trees also had branches about 6 inches wide that had been completely ripped off about 9 or 10 feet up. It made me feel bad. Even my friend didn't know what to think about it. We thought that maybe someone had come back and built a fort at some point, but we weren't really sure. Then my friend and I both started to feel weird. I don't know what it is, but it made me feel really nervous, and my friend also noticed it. I think we both decided it might be best for our own safety to leave. For a while, I couldn't get rid of the feeling. The clearing wasn't too far from our campsite, at most, it was about a half-mile away. So, for the rest of the day, all I could think about was what broke off those branches and left those marks on the tree. It made no sense to me at all, so let's skip ahead to that night. We're sitting around a campfire joking and having a good time when my friend starts to freak out, saying that he just saw something move in the distance. And my friend and I are laughing and asking, "What do you mean? What does it even mean that you saw a movement?" And he gets very pale and says something big happened. I don't know, but I saw what looked like eyes in the firelight. Whatever it was watching us. It wasn't too far from there. So we think he's mostly messing with us, and we don't really believe what he says. We just keep talking and having fun, but he stays very quiet for the rest of the night. So all we do is ask him if everything is all right. Is there something we should know about? He keeps saying the same thing, which is that something was watching us, but he didn't know what it was. It scared him a lot, and my friend and I tried to reassure him that everything would be okay, but who knows? We don't know for sure, but it could have just been a trick of the light. Well, as we lay in our tents that night, we start to hear something. There was a voice-like sound, but it wasn't just any voice. It was a voice that both I and my friend knew right away. His mother. About 9 years had passed since his mother had died. When he was about 14 years old, she died from cancer. So, when my friend, her mom, and I hear this, we look at each other and wonder, are you hearing the same thing? I'm seeing looks of complete surprise. When we look back at the friend who was scared earlier because of the eye shine, we see that he is asleep. So my friend and I look at each other and then back outside. Now, the voice is getting clearer and calling both of our names, saying, "Come here, I want to show you something." Both? My friend and I were so shocked that we almost threw up right then and there. It sounded like it was in the woods further away. Someone or something was able to sound like his mom. We didn't need any more than that. My friend grabbed his knife, and I grabbed mine, too. Then we huddled together, shook, and waited for something to happen. We kept hearing the voice teasing us to come into the woods. But after a short time, it stopped, and we heard how quiet the night was. Only the sound of our fire, which we still had going, could be heard. The rest of the room was very quiet. There wasn't a sound. You can just barely hear a leaf fall from the tree. We probably waited there for what seemed like hours, but nothing ever happened. I think we fell asleep in the end. The next morning, we decided not to tell our friend because we thought it would scare him even more. But my other friend, whose mom called us or pretended to be his mother, said, "Hey guys, what do you think about moving our campsite to somewhere else just to be safe? Maybe they're our friends, right?" And maybe he did really see I shine, in which case we should be scared. And our friend quickly told us not to be afraid. We should be careful and look out for each other. We don't know what kind of animals live out here. This other friend of ours was also part native, so he really looked into all the folklore, legends, and stories about Bigfoot, dogma, skinwalkers, and whatever else they really believe in. So he was already able to enter that kind of world. My other friend and I heard the voices together. We didn't believe any of it until now. I'm not sure. We don't know for sure, but after this, we moved our campsite because we didn't know what would happen if we stayed there another night. Who knows, maybe this thing that imitated his mother's voice to try to lure us into the woods would show up. Those who like things to be a little more normal might think this is crazy, but I'm here to tell you that my experience, I feel, is pretty unexplainable. So please be patient with me as I tell you something you don't know. So, a few of my friends and I got together and decided to go camping for the weekend. So far, it sounds pretty normal. So, here's where things start to get strange. We have a camping trip we like to take, and a place where we like to camp. About once a year, and sometimes more if we can, we go there. We were on our way there at the time, which, by the way, has never happened before. So we go there, and our GPS starts turning us around for no reason. Right? Well, the GPS couldn't find our campsite for some reason, and it kept moving us around and around. Then it would say connection lost over and over. We didn't know what to think about it. Even my friend made the comment in jest. GPS, you're drunk. Go home. The story didn't end there. As this is being talked about, we are getting angry. We can't quite remember where our campsite is, but we know it's close by. At some point, one of our friends will decide that enough is enough. Let's just get up and go for a walk and see what happens. And it seems like just as he said that, the whole car dies. It must have been an engine failure or some kind of electronic failure, but the whole car just shuts down right there, leaving us all wondering what just happened. We're all kind of curious and scratching our heads, wondering how on earth his car could have just died on us, since it never did that before. He always does a great job of getting the car serviced. This includes getting the oil changed and doing anything else that might be needed to make sure his car runs well, so he's angry. He gets out of the car, lifts the hood, and checks for problems. The battery is working, and everything else looks fine. But when he turns the key in the ignition, it's as if the engine is completely dead. That's wonderful. Now we're stuck here, about a half-mile from our campsite. We have to carry everything to get to camp, and if nobody comes to fix our car, we won't be able to go home. So, we start taking things out of the back of his trunk one by one, like the chairs, camping gear, and other things we'll need for our camping trip. Then, we hear a strange sound coming from the front of the car. My friends and I all look at each other, and we're not sure what it is. What is that? Is something flying close to the ground? We're saying to ourselves, this makes no sense at all. Now, we can hear that the sounds are getting louder. Now we know for sure that the sounds we heard were helicopters and a lot of them. And when we looked up, we saw 134,679 black helicopters, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, in all. They look like military helicopters, and they seem to be on a mission. And they were going pretty fast, for sure. We all thought, what's going on? That's strange. After that, my friend said that there might be a military base nearby or something. We all started to feel like there was something strange in the air. Everything felt like it was full of electricity. It's hard to explain. It was a very unsettling feeling, like something could happen at any time, but we tried to ignore it as best we could. We decided to keep going to the spot where we were going to camp. So we were holding everything and dragging it slowly across the field to get to where we could go. So we're trying to get to our spot quickly by carrying everything in our arms. Still, we had a long way to go. So this wasn't going to be the most fun adventure ever. In fact, it was probably going to hurt a lot. I was not happy about having to drag a 20-pound tent over a mile and a half away from our camp. We thought it was closer than it was. All of us think that was a great idea. So we go back to the car and wait there while he checks out where the campsite is supposed to be. We've all been there more than once, but I also noticed something right away. Even though we've been here many times, we didn't know where the car broke down. Even though we were still more than a mile from camp, this road or section of forest looked different. So, there's probably a good reason for that, but it didn't seem right. Maybe we really did get lost somewhere and are now in the wrong place. I'm not sure. I think we waited around for about 5 to 15 minutes, wondering how long it would take him to get there and find our camp. Then we saw him running back to us, looking very scared. Something had to have scared him. I don't know how to explain it even now. It was the summer before my last year of high school, and I was a senior. We decided to go camping in the Sawtooth Mountains in Idaho with some friends. I think it was like a tent for 20 people, but I could be wrong. No matter what, it was a very large tent that fit us perfectly. 5 minutes after we found our spot, we talked about who would do what, and then the two of us went back to set up the tent. Some of us went to get firewood, and others went to help set up camp, start a fire, get food, etc. After we set up the fire, the food, the delicious kebabs, and a big tent, everything will be ready to go. Teenage boys, it's time to calm down and enjoy being teenagers. We, of course, brought beer and wine. But it was strange that none of us got too drunk before the night's events. There was nothing special about the big case of beer. We opened the beer and started making food. After that, we all sat around the campfire and laughed, told jokes, and talked about what girls we were going to try to date in our senior year. The list was long. We started to get tired after a few beers and some food, so Bill and Joel did the same. Go get us more wood. About 7 minutes later, the same two people who were there earlier come back with much less wood than they usually bring. I asked, and they said, "How's it going, guys? Where is everyone's wood?" Both of them look very scared and pale. I'm being told that they saw something. So we start asking them while they are stumbling over their words and trying to tell us. When we hear a loud sound that sounds like a tree being cut down and falling over, we immediately turn our attention back to the source of the sound. Most of us who stood up thought something was coming out of the woods and going to hit us. It was so loud and scary that it would be an understatement to say we were scared at the time. Since we don't know what kind of bear might be back there, we all agreed that we should probably just leave camp now and come back in the morning to get our stuff. Both of my friends agreed that it wasn't a bear, but something else. So, we left camp. The next morning, When we came back to get our stuff, everything was torn up and broken. While we were gone the night before, something had destroyed everything at our camp. How it was done? I still have bad dreams about it even now. Last year, I went camping with my friends in the woods for the weekend. It was, at the very least, a scary event. This story is about something that happened to us on the trip. I'll be honest, I've never really liked being outside, and I don't think I ever will. But a few of my friends and I did something fun together last summer. We decided to go camping in the middle of a forest for a night or two. There were trails for mountain biking and hiking, as well as very comfortable places where we could set up our tents and cook our food over an open fire. Their parents had a strange rule, though: no electronics. There was no problem with flashlights and lanterns, but cell phones and tablets were not allowed. Their parents thought it was weird if we brought anything, so they wanted to make sure we had a real camping experience. I think they liked things like that a lot. In any case, we got there around 5 p.m. The sun was just going down over the mountains. After taking a look around, we started making dinner, which was just instant ramen. The guys got together and cooked hot dogs on sticks while the girls went looking for wood for the fire. We didn't really know how to make our own fire, but we were lucky to find some dead branches nearby that we could use. Still, it took us a long time. We tried turning them on one by one, but that didn't work, so we had to move faster. We finally got our first real fire going. No one had expected this to take as long as it did. We kept adding more branches to it as it grew. Even though this made the air smoky, the branches kept the mosquitoes away. As the sun went down, everything looked nice and warm. After that, though, the sun went down and it quickly got very dark. It got so dark that you couldn't see more than 2 feet ahead of you. Even the stars were pretty quiet tonight. We kept ourselves busy by talking and cooking. We had made a lot of food after a few hours. Around the campfire, everyone was eating and playing Tell the Truth or Dare. The night was nice and warm. Because of this, we stayed close to the fire, putting on a little more wood every now and then. At one point, some of us even fell asleep. I was still awake and talking to other people who were also still awake. A bright flash of light comes from the nearby woods, and my friend and I see it. Like when a camera flashes, it made everything very bright. I couldn't see much, but I could hear something moving along with the flash. What happened? We're all asking ourselves. Then it happens again, but closer to us this time. Another loud noise and bright light. Then there was a second flash, followed by more movement. We looked, but we didn't see anyone or anything that could have caused this flash. And random full flashes of the woods all around it. My friends were looking at each other in horror and trying to wake up our friends and family around us by pointing to what it was. It happened a few more times, and then it stopped. We camped maybe 100 yards away. At that time, we could hear a loud noise that sounded like a big engine or machine running, but we couldn't see anything. One of my friends decided to run over there with a flashlight to see what he could see. Even though we couldn't see anything, the noise kept getting louder. When he turned on his light, he saw nothing. But he started to feel really bad, so he said, "Guys, I think we should leave in the next few minutes." Some of us started to feel really sick, and both of his parents started to throw up. The loud humming stopped all of a sudden, and everything seems to be back to normal. But most of the night was quiet. I think we were all awake for quite a while. Because of what we had heard and seen, we couldn't even try to sleep. The next morning, well, as soon as the sun came up, we packed up everything and moved to a totally different camping spot. We didn't want to take the chance that it would happen again the next night. I've been camping for a long time, so things in the woods don't bother me that much. But what happened to me is terrifying. It was the last day of my family's trip to Canada's Lake Superior Provincial Park. We set up camp near an old mining town on the edge of a lake by one of the big cliffs. About 100 yards separates each of our cabins from the next. We could all fit in my cabin, me, my parents, and my 2 brothers. There were 2 small beds and a couch that could fit another person when it was folded out. Even though there is no air conditioning, it felt pretty crowded. So, we had to leave all the windows open at night to get fresh air. When I woke up at 2 a.m. to go to the bathroom, I saw my little brother sitting on his bed, which was a fold-out couch, and looking out the cabin's open window. He didn't answer when I asked him what was wrong. He kept looking out the window as if he saw something or someone very scary. He looked like he saw something strange, like a ghost. When I walked up to him, his face was completely white and he looked like he had just come back from an exorcism. It looked like he was trying very hard not to scream. Even though I couldn't see anything out of the ordinary from the window, I could tell by the way he was acting that whatever was making him act this way was not normal. He didn't do anything but hug and squeeze the bed sheets and look out the window. I was a little bit wary of his answer. So, I went outside without telling my brothers or parents what was going on. I saw something move in the bushes outside my brother's cabin as I walked by them. At first, it looked small, but when it showed its face, it was scary, so I took it for what it was worth. The first thing that made me remember it. If you look up the Russian sleep experiment online, you will see a picture of what looks like a white humanoid with sharp teeth, dead eyes or something, and pointed ears. This kind of reminded me of that. As soon as I saw it, I dropped my phone, screamed, and ran back to the cabin. When I got back inside, I slammed the door and woke up my brothers and parents, who are now awake and wondering what's going on. My dad was really mad. I told them to shut the windows because there was something out there. My mom was now worried that my dad was looking for my son. Don't worry, nothing is out there. I tried to get rid of that feeling, but I couldn't. I tried to make him agree with me. No, because I saw it out there. There's something out there. I know it's true, but he didn't want to hear me. He finally got so mad that he made me sit next to the bed and told me I'd be grounded for a long time if I made another sound, so they all try to go back to sleep. My brother has no interest in me. One of my brothers was shaking as he sat by an open window. He didn't say anything at all. He knew that we both knew this story. Goes back to 2013. I was camping in the middle of nowhere. I've been coming to this campground for a few years. It always seems so quiet and peaceful. I didn't have to spend much time on the property until it got dark. So, my friends and I went camping, and at night, we all decided to go deeper into the woods. They fell asleep quickly, but it took me longer to do the same. A lot of sounds could be heard coming from outside. After about an hour of trying to sleep, I heard something quickly moving toward my tent until it stopped right next to it. When I opened my eyes, I saw a large, dark figure staring at me from not too far away. It could not have been more than 5 feet away. More than once, I screamed because I wanted it to stop. After 10 seconds, it stopped moving. Then it went slowly back into the dark. I was very scared by everything. As I lay there, I thought, God, I was still alive. The family of my friend didn't know what was going on when they woke up. The time was told to them. They just thought it was another story. I never went back to that campsite again, even though my friends begged me to. I don't think their family liked my little fits of anger when I was a kid. Camping has always been fun for me. We're back out in nature. You get to spend time with your family outside. But when I go camping these days, I've been noticing some strange things. I feel like someone or something is watching me. I've felt this way since I was young, but it's gotten much stronger in the last few years. We were on one of our annual fishing trips in the middle of the summer about 5 years ago when I first noticed something wasn't right. My parents and I set up a tent near some big rocks while my brother and dad went fishing on a pier about 50 feet away. They told us girls to stay put so they could help us if we got into trouble. At the time, they didn't know it, but that was a big mistake. My mom was sitting there by herself and reading a book while my little brother played with his toys nearby. I couldn't take my eyes off of this beautiful view of the lake and forest around it. I couldn't help feeling like someone was watching me. It didn't go away until my mom asked me where I was going. I thought it was just my imagination at that point. My dad and brother went fishing, so we stayed put until they got back so they could spend time with us before dinner. As things started to calm down, we noticed something inside one of those rocky cliffs. We thought it might be a deer or another animal, but because we knew something about it, we paid more attention to it. It didn't make sense. It looked like a tall figure. Its dark, shaggy fur almost made it look like it was dressed. It was huddled up against the cliff wall with its hands clenched together, as if it was hiding something to protect itself. As soon as we saw it, I couldn't help but squint. What I saw was that it stood up tall and looked over us, then turned and climbed up the rocks to the top of the cliff. When my mom and brother saw it the next day, they went crazy. We try as hard as we can to forget about it. I don't think my dad actually thought that. We spent the whole afternoon fishing, and everything went well. After a while, we were all tired because we'd been fishing all day. I saw my mom walking towards us. She was telling us that she had seen something about 10 feet from the shore. It was also seen by my brother. He pointed at it and asked what it was over and over again. So, my older brother swims out into the water to where this thing is kind of waiting. I couldn't see his face when he pulled on it, but it sounded like it turned into something that would bother him. He couldn't take his eyes off the 3 fingers that reached out of the water and grabbed him, pulling him under the water until they reached land. When I tried to pull my brother into the water, he screamed, "You're breaking." As I ran away, I screamed and cried. The thing went into the lake after running into local police and even EMTs. It was never seen again. And doctors check us out. We all agreed on this point. It must have been something like a skinwalker, no matter what it was. I think it was in the water that day because it was trying to get closer to our campsite without us noticing. I don't know what to say about the legends anymore. They might be true. He runs up to us and is completely out of breath. Something just happened to him, and now we're scared. So, we joke around and ask Roger, "What's wrong with you that a bear chased you and tried to eat you?" He keeps saying, "No, guys, something happened," but we laugh and ask, "What do you mean something happened?" We had to leave right away, but he kept running to the car, jumping in, and putting his key in the ignition, desperately trying to get us going. When we saw how crazy he was acting, we were like, "Dude, what's up? You're acting really strangely. What did you see?" But he didn't answer. He tried to take our phones right away, but none of us had cell service. I don't know what we'll do or how we'll get out of this situation. It was already getting close to the end of the day. We wouldn't have much more time with light. When we finally got him to calm down, he told us that something big had been chasing him and that he doesn't think this is where a campsite is because things don't look right. He told us that for hours he kept getting lost. We kind of smirked and said, "No, that can't be right. You were only gone for less than 20 minutes, but he says it was at least 3 or 4 hours. So, we had a fight about the time. I told him, "Look, you left at 4:32, and it's only been 48 minutes since then. You haven't been gone that long," but he looked at the clock and was kind of shocked. He gets out of the car, and we keep talking and trying to figure out what happened because he's acting so strangely. Suddenly, even though the key isn't even in the ignition, the car turns on, and we all start cheering and getting excited. My friend just said, "Look, we need to get out of here right now. Forget the camping trip, let's go home." He doesn't really want to say more about himself. So I think we all just shrug our shoulders and, even though it bothers us, we just deal with it. We throw all of our stuff in the back of the car and jump in. My friend put the key in the ignition, but the car turned on without the key. We're not sure what that means, so we don't know what to compare it to. And as we drive away, my friend is very, very tense. All of us are wondering what happened out there and what this is all about. He didn't answer when I asked if any of this had anything to do with the fact that you seem to have lost time or that your car turned off and on by itself without a key. He just wouldn't answer. This has been something to do. I really don't know how to wrap my head around it. Like I said, it doesn't quite fit into the normal world. It sounds like some crazy made-up story, but I don't know. Even my friend still won't talk about it, you can tell every time it's brought up. All he can see on his face is panic and worry. Out there, something bad happened to him. He saw something. What did he see? I'm not sure, and I'm not sure I want to know. So, in 2015, a good friend of mine and I decided to go camping in their backyard. They live up in the mountains, so their backyard is basically the wilderness that leads up to the mountains even higher up. The night started out great. We didn't have to deal with his parents, so we could pretty much just have the best time ever. We bought a lot of soda chips and other good junk food for a camping trip that was a must. Even our comic books were there. After setting up camp, we were all set to go. We climbed into our tent and talked about how exciting it was to be out in the wilderness, even though it was just his backyard. As I already said, that didn't matter to us boys, though. We had a great time, and things didn't go wrong until later in the night. I'd say it was more like 11 p.m. where my friend and I both got pretty tired and decided that we had had enough pop junk food and comic books for the night. We decided to say goodnight to each other and turn off our little makeshift LED lantern. We got into our sleeping bags and tried to fall asleep. I wake up in the middle of the night, but I don't know exactly when or what time. The first thing that wakes me up is what sounds like heavy movement right outside the tent. Since I'm still half asleep, I just assume it's my friend's father checking on us to make sure we're okay. But then I roll over and sort of open my eyes. I noticed that my friend had left. I thought that was strange, so I sat up in my sleeping bag and called out to him. I didn't hear anything back, and now I'm getting worried because the sound of movement is getting closer to the tent. I just laid there holding onto my sleeping bag and hoping that whatever it was didn't come into our tent. I never thought monsters existed, and it didn't sound like one. It sounded like someone really heavy was walking around, but whoever it was went around the tent a few times, maybe 10 or 20 feet, before stopping and just standing still. I didn't know where my friend was, and for all I knew, his dad could have been messing with us outside. I was trying to calm down, but all I could do was tell myself, okay. He probably went inside to use the bathroom. He must have a good reason for not being in the tent right now. Then I hear the footsteps move away pretty quickly, and maybe a minute or two later I hear footsteps and the back door of the house opening and running. Then I kind of tighten my sleeping bag, and it's my friend. He's unzipping the tent and climbing back in, and I kind of scold him, "Where were you? What went wrong?" He just says that he thinks he ate too much junk food, and that it made him feel like he had to go to the bathroom, so he did. Sorry, he didn't mean to wake you up. I told him it was fine, so he didn't wake me up. I thought I heard something outside her tent, but he says he didn't see anything. I asked him, "Was it your dad?" Because I knew that he'd been sleeping the whole time. I told him I was concerned. I knew it wasn't just a big animal when I heard someone standing outside her tent and circling. Based on the way they walked, it was someone who was out and about. I think my friend was just joking, because no one else is out here. So, I'll say this, I don't think you need to worry. I wasn't seeing things. I did not dream. It wasn't a bad dream. This isn't something I made up. What sounds woke me up from a deeper sleep? Someone or something was standing outside of our tent that night, and I almost wonder if they left when my friend came back from the house to the tent. Did someone have a question? Did someone hop the fence and try to get into our tent? My friend doesn't really have any neighbors out here, so I don't know who would be on his lawn this late at night, but things like this really make you wonder. My story starts when I was 20 and went camping with some close friends and my brother in the Pisgah National Forest for about 6 days. The first night was a lot of fun, just sitting around the campfire and telling ghost stories. The next day, we hiked to the top of one of the hills near our campsite and saw 2 rocks, stacked on top of each other about 10 feet away. They had strange carvings on them, but we decided to leave them alone for now because we thought they might be some kind of tribal land marking or something. So we went back to our own campsite. On the 3rd day, my brother and I hiked out to those stones again to look at them more closely and try to figure out what they meant. Both stones were on their sides when we got there. We were all scared and left them where they were. We could feel something strange around them. Now, my hunter friend Tyler noticed that there was an old trail behind our campsite that led to this area of stones. So we chose to look into it. It's clear that people have been through it. About 15 feet or so. We came across this huge hole with a few bones in it. It looked like the body of an old deer. We don't know what that was for, but it might have been a trap. On the 4th day, my brother and I went hiking back to those rocks. It again, and when we got there, there were more stones piled up. Each one is just as good as it was on the first day. No one else is out here, so I don't know how this could be done. We weren't sure, so we moved them to see if they were stacked for a reason or held together in some way. They weren't, and they wouldn't even fall over. It was very scary. On that night, I woke up around 3 a.m. to go to the bathroom. When I turned on my lights, my friend Tyler was standing outside her tent, pale white and shaking like he had just seen a ghost. He said that something woke him up in the middle of the night. He says that this energy was standing over him and holding him down, as if something was trying to fight him, push him down, and make him forget everything. I didn't believe him until he showed me the scratches and tears all over his chest, right below his neckline. It looked like someone was holding on to him and their nails were digging into his skin. My brother asked Tyler the next morning why he ran away in the middle of the night, but he wouldn't answer. As he felt more at ease, he started to talk more. He thought that there was a bad person who would stay in his tent. We didn't really know what to think. So we thought we'd go back to the stones and look at them again. I know what's on your mind. It might be strange. We kept going back, but there was this force that kept drawing us to these stones. It's like I don't know what it was. We just couldn't get enough. We had to check on him over and over again. I'm not sure how to explain it. The next morning, after breakfast, my brother and I hiked out to these stones again, but this time they were stacked in a completely different way. This was being done out here by someone or something. We didn't know who or what, but that night we had to find out. All over the campsite, you could feel something strange. I don't know how else to explain it, but it felt like there were a lot of people around you when you woke up, and there was a bad vibe all over the campsite. Even my friends could feel it. So I called out to Tyler, and when he answered, I asked, "Do you feel that?" He told him that was him. I asked, "What do you mean by that?" "It's the same demon that's been in my tent every night, and has been scratching and choking me. It's in charge of the stones. We're here in this camp, where he's mad and where he is. He doesn't want us here." My first thought was that Tyler was playing a joke on us. But this seems strange. Tyler is usually pretty quiet, so when he says these things I think, okay, he's either possessed or something is going on. So I get out of my tent to check on him and see that he has white eyes, more scratches all over his arms, and looks completely crazy. Tyler looks at me and says, he wants us to go to the stones. He then gets out of his tent, grabs a flashlight, and walks down the trail to where the stones are. This is in the middle of the night, when most people are sleeping. So I shout at him, "Tyler, what are you doing?" And then he just leaves. I could have gone after him, but I figured he knew where he was going, so I just let him go. I went back to my tent because I thought he would be back in a few minutes, but I think I fell asleep instead. When I got up in the morning, my brother looked worried and asked, "Hey, where's Tyler?" I took a look around and said, "I don't know. Isn't he here?" Just then, my brother shook his head. "No, I don't want him to be there." My brother looked at me like he didn't know what to do. "What do you mean by the stones?" I told him what had happened the night before. He, too, thought it was weird. So we both got up and walked down to where the stones were. Tyler was sitting there with his legs crossed and looking very strange. He was just staring off into the distance with a creepy smile on his face. "Tyler, are you okay?" His smile never broke. I don't even think the man blinked. If anybody was possessed, this was it. He did not respond to us, he did not say anything. It took me physically grabbing his arm, pulling him up from a sitting spot to get him to move, and we had to physically move him back to camp. And as soon as we got back and Tyler began seeing some really weird stuff. The stones want us, the stones want us back. And so that was more than enough for me and my brother. This was turning into a little mini horror movie, and I was not going to be a part of it. We took everything we had there, including Tyler, dragging him back to civilization. But Tyler's personality seemed different even when we were back in the real world. He was a lot less loud. He is usually pretty quiet, but this time he was much more quiet than usual. He would just say and do strange things. The things were not at all like them. We stopped seeing them after a while. I've heard stories about people who are possessed, so I almost wonder if he was really possessed. Well, their personalities change, so they end up being someone else. Almost to the letter, that's what happened in Tyler that night. Is it possible that this stone's demon took over him in some way? I don't know the answer, but I do know that he changed and was not the same person. My girlfriend and I went camping over the 4th of July weekend. We were at a campground whose name I won't say because it was pretty quiet. Everyone had already gone to sleep. It was almost July 4th, but not quite. So we were sitting on the hood of my truck, wrapped in a blanket, and cuddling while looking at the stars. My girlfriend was pointing out all the different stars, and as in any typical romantic situation, there were a couple of shooting stars, which we thought was cool. My girlfriend likes science a lot, so this was more fun for her than it was for me as we looked at the stars. When we saw one star in the sky, we thought it was a shooting star, but it was different. The way the mood was different, it didn't move across the sky like a typical shooting star. It also went down a lot. At first, my girlfriend pointed out a star and said, "Wow, look at that one," and we watched it slowly move across the sky. Before stopping, I asked her, "Do you think that's a plane? So, what is it?" She told me no, because it was too high up and the lights didn't look like they came from an airplane. There was no doubt that this was a star, but it moved very, very slowly. Not like a meteor that just appeared and then disappeared. Then, as soon as it was gone, strange electrical sounds started coming from everywhere. Enough to make my girlfriend get up from where she was sitting. She began looking around saying, "Are you kidding me? So, what is it? What are those sounds?" I told her, "I don't know, it sounds weird." "What do you think it could be?" It sounded like strange electronic interference or something similar, like a radio signal that got lost or a radio wave or something. Something that no longer worked. Maybe it seems like the noise is coming from everywhere. We couldn't figure out where it was, and it was starting to bother us. It was getting louder and louder. Then, all around us, we started to feel strange vibrations, almost like a small earthquake, but there wasn't one. My girlfriend kept asking me, "Are you feeling what I'm feeling? What's going on? Am I going crazy?" It was getting to the point where I didn't like how strange things were getting, and I wasn't feeling so comfortable anymore. Sounds and noises start to sound more mechanical and closer together. Like big construction machines and tools were being used in the nearby woods, but that can't be true. Nearby were only campgrounds, and it was almost 12:30 at night. So what could be the reason? Even though my girlfriend and I were a little bit scared, we were more confused and interested by everything. We didn't know how to understand it. We decided to just call it a night and climb into our tents. The next morning, a few campers came over and asked us, "Hey, did you hear those weird sounds last night?" We said, "Yes, we did." "What did you hear?" They both told the same story. We told them we were watching shooting stars and that we saw one slowing down as it moved across the sky. As soon as it stopped moving and went away, all these strange noises started. Now, we talked to one camper who was crazy about aliens, UFOs, and a secret underground base. We listened to what he had to say, as did my girlfriend. But we don't think that stuff is true. We are more skeptical and open-minded, and we think that all the noises we heard might have a reasonable, logical explanation. There might be construction going on underground, or this star going out and these noises starting at the same time might just be a coincidence. Still, read it. I'd love to know what you think. Did UFOs or aliens really come to this place? Or is this just a coincidence? Camping has been one of the best things I've done in my life, but this night it was one of the scariest things I've ever done. I don't know how to explain it, but whatever was coming toward my tent that night felt like something you wouldn't want to meet in a dark forest late at night. Right away, I thought about dogma and what little I knew about cryptozoology. My campsite was on top of a cliff that looked out over a small forest. There had been a lot of UFO sightings here over the years, and there were also a few empty houses in the middle of the trees. At least 3 of them seemed to have burned down for no apparent reason. It was a long, steep dirt path to get up or down the cliff. I could hear my dogs barking from the direction of the houses. So I got up to see what was making them bark. I couldn't see anything in that direction, but something down by one of the empty houses caught my eye. I moved closer because it looked like some kind of dark mass was moving around near the house. I found that it was very hard to see if there wasn't just enough light to make out the shape against the dark background. I never would have noticed it. I immediately thought of all the UFO sightings over the years and how these dogmen and other strange things might have been behind most of them. I think that's what's been driving my dogs crazy. So I got out my phone and tried to take some photos, but all I could see was black. Even though it was probably too dark down there, it looked fine on my phone. I walked away from there, leaving whatever it was alone because I didn't want to mess with it, and just keep going on my trip. Now, later that night, after I went to bed, I woke up at about 1 a.m. for no reason. I don't know why, but it feels like my body just woke up on its own. So I decided that now would be a good time to go to the bathroom because it might help my body relax. So, when I got up, I looked around and saw that there was a big cornfield near our campsite. When I see the shape in that way, I call it him. It's hard to describe him because he had long, dark black hair and a head that looked like a dog's, with pointed ears and broad shoulders, like an old bear dog. His neck fur was longer than the fur on the rest of him, and it hung down like a mane. I didn't move for a while after I saw him. He looked too scared to even blink, and he didn't seem to notice me much. Instead, he was going through the corn to get to the other side of the field and into the trees. At that point, I decided to stay on there, go to the bathroom, and then go back to my tent. When I woke up the next morning, I felt much better, and I couldn't find any signs that this wolf man had been to my campsite. I didn't want to take any risks. Even though I didn't see this thing every night, I wasn't going to stay another night just in case he wanted to come back and was curious. When I was a teenager, a few of my friends and I were playing capture the flag in our campground. We were all getting tired as it started to get dark. So we went back to my friend's camping trailer. Because his dad smoked a lot, he didn't want to go inside. It smelled like smoke. So we decided to just sit around the campfire and eat hot dogs and s'mores, tell stories, and make jokes, which is pretty typical for teenage boys. But my friend noticed something odd about 30 feet away by another camper in the woods. The place wasn't very well lit, so please don't blame us. But there was a person there. My friend pointed it out to me and said, "Hey, look at that weird-looking guy up there. I mean, why is he just standing there and staring at us? Me and my friends are doing the same thing, and it's very strange." He looked like a very tall man with what might have been very pointed ears on top of its head. He was standing right next to a big oak tree that was just out of reach of the light from a nearby camper. At first, we thought it might be the man who lived in or was camping in that camper and was just standing there. But he was sort of looking toward us, not directly at us, but toward us. We're all wondering why he has ears that stick out like that. Even if he has a mask on, it's not even close to Halloween. The rest of us were getting very interested in what we saw. It didn't make sense what we're looking at. Why was this man just standing there next to a tree and staring at us until the tree moved and turned its head to look the other way? When a few of us cast our spells and one of us screamed, the shape looked like a big wolf head. Once, the head turned sideways while the body stayed still and held onto a big oak tree near the camper. Some of my friends were like, "Dude, is that a werewolf?" We're also 14, 15, and 16 years old, so there's no way we could be werewolves. It just doesn't make sense. But either way, we are looking at it. You could consider that this could have been someone in a costume, but the reasons didn't make sense. It was nothing like Halloween at all. This person stood up very high. Now, the father of a friend of mine was 64 years old, and this person was easily 7 to 8 feet tall, maybe even a bit taller. He wasn't very wide, like a football player, but he was still very thin. We couldn't really see the legs, but the proportions of the body and the size of the head didn't seem right for a human in a costume. Either this was a real animal or someone was wearing a very expensive Hollywood Halloween costume, but I don't think it was the latter. So now we're all kind of huddled together watching this sight, which is pretty still. Some of us are a little afraid to say anything. We don't want either of them to notice us. At this point, some of us are calling it an IT instead of him. So we watch for a few minutes, and then someone close by, I don't know how far away, but probably quite a few campsites down, revs up their truck. This must have scared it, him, or both, because as soon as that loud engine revved up, the wolf ran into the trees. It happened so quickly that it was like a blur, and everyone is just standing there with their mouths open. Did you just see that? That couldn't have been a person. I don't care if you're in the Olympics or what, you can't move that fast. It was impossible, and as you can imagine, we couldn't stop talking about it the rest of the night. When my friend's dad came out later, he asked us, "Hey, boys, what are you so excited about?" We decided not to tell him because we knew he wouldn't believe us. We weren't really scared, but it was definitely a very interesting thing to see. Well, I don't usually believe in ghosts or Bigfoot, but this could have been something from something we don't understand, and I'll never know for sure when I think back on this memory. Before I tell you my story, let me just say that I have experience with camping, hiking, and other outdoor activities. I know how bears kill, where they live, and how they move. From what I've seen so far, I'm pretty sure this wasn't a bear. Let me tell you what happened. So, we were up in Colorado, and it was fall. The mornings were very cold. So, I got up pretty early and split a lot of firewood to get ready for a nice warm campfire where I could cook breakfast, drink hot coffee, etc. I broke off about a quarter of it and put it in the back of my pickup truck. I wasn't ready to go back to camp yet, so I used some downed trees where I was working to try out my new chainsaw. I worked on this for 2 or 3 hours, cutting anything small enough to fit into the fire ring into pieces that were easy to move around. It wasn't easy work, but I split wood for a living, so I know how to do it quickly and well. This is why I was able to split a quarter of wood so quickly. Also, if you do it, it's a great way to work out. So I go back to camp and start a fire. My friend Jason and his wife are in a tent, and they can already smell the coffee making. He asked if there was any he could have. So, of course, I told him that yes. That morning we sat around the fire, drank coffee, laughed, talked, and ate a delicious breakfast. This happened very high up in the mountains near Boulder, Colorado. Where we were camping on the mountain, you could see for miles. As far as the eye could see, there were beautiful country mountains with lots of small trees, scrub brush, and metal grass. We were enjoying the beauty of nature as the sun shone brightly through the pine trees and the birds sang loudly. Fall is glorious, especially in Colorado. After breakfast, we all agreed that we would go on a hike. So when we were done, we made sure we had water, canteens, and everything else we would need, and we started walking slowly on trails around. Now the story really starts to go in a different direction. Most of the time, we don't follow trails too much. We like going on hikes. That's the only way to see the real back country, as I like to call it. So we just started doing this, and it was about 2 p.m. At this point, we were probably about 3 to 4 miles off the trail. And yes, we were not going to get lost. We pretty much knew where we were going, but now things started to get very strange. We came across a body. This was a big bull elk that had died not long before. Even though the blood was still fresh, it had not yet fully clumped together. But the problem wasn't that we found a large bullock dead. It had to do with the way it was killed. All of us were upset by this. The head was completely separated from the body, and it was sitting on a stump about 25 to 30 feet away from the body. The front legs were broken backwards, and the whole belly was ripped open, not cut. How any hunter would do when he's under pressure. This looks like a big thing punched a hole in the stomach, and a big pile of guts was lying about 20 feet south and downhill of the body. Being still. It had its whole left back leg ripped off. It looked like a chicken leg had been ripped off a chicken body. There were clear tears in the flesh and meat. The back leg couldn't be found, and the right back leg was bent backwards. Something was broken. I don't know what had hurt this bull elk so much that it was in pieces. Now, I don't know about you, but before you say, well, that was just a bear, that's not how bears kill. Bears eat what they kill, and whatever killed this didn't eat it. In fact, when we all looked over the body, there were no bite marks, no scratch marks, and nothing that we could see had tried to eat it. The way it looked, it was as if something had grabbed this bull elk by the head, pulled it off its body, and set the head on a nearby stump. Then, something had ripped the back, left leg off its body, punched a hole in its stomach, ripped it open, and pulled out all the guts. As I just said, the kill didn't look too old. At most, I'd say it had been dead for 12 hours. The blood hadn't even clotted yet, or if it had, it was just starting to. For some reason, none of us thought to take a picture. But I think it's because we were so scared and because we weren't in the middle of a forest. We were in a small meadow, which was a pretty big open area with a few trees and a few stumps here and there. The stump this elk head was put on was from an old tree that had died and fallen. After the head was taken off, someone or something put it there on purpose. Now tell me what kind of animal lives in the wilds of Colorado that is that strong, that smart, and that kills in this way. What we saw has nothing to do with what we know. How a deer kills or eats. This was also about 4 to 5 miles off the trail, so I guess you could say it was deep in the woods or on a mountainside. After that, we didn't really look into it anymore. That was more than enough, in my opinion. After that, we went back to the trail. We talked about it all the time. I wouldn't say we all had a bad feeling, but seeing an animal kill that way was definitely disturbing. I had never seen it before that afternoon. I wish I could say that the rest of our camping trip was crazy and full of interesting things, but it was pretty normal, and that was the only thing that really stood out to us all. It was the craziest camping trip I've ever been on, and it all happened in Colorado. There must be something out there in the mountains. What's going on with the elk being killed? I can't find out. When I was about 10 years old, I joined the Boy Scouts. From what I can remember, I spent at least 2 or 3 years there. This memory takes us back to when we went camping for about 2 weeks in Pennsylvania. Now, I can't remember exactly where we were because I was 10 and we went to a lot of different places, but this campground or wherever we were had a really fun river where we play all the time. I think it was about 3 to 4 feet deep. But don't hold that against me too much. When it comes to very specific details, my memory isn't the best. Also, while we were there, I and a few other scouts decided to go swimming. I kept looking over the riverbank, hoping to see something. It was like that feeling you get when you think someone is watching you. Well, that's about how it was. But no matter how many times I turned around, there was never anything there. At one point, I just decided to stop caring about how I felt and keep swimming, playing, or doing whatever it is I was doing. When my friend and I got out of the house, probably about 2 hours later, he asked me, "Hey, did you see that deer watching us?" Isn't that strange? I looked at him and asked, "What do you mean, honey?" I thought something was looking at us. But whenever I turned around, there was nothing there, and his eyes got kind of big. You also felt it. Then he told me that, yes, there was a big deer up in the trees. It was standing up and kind of looking at us. I've never seen a deer stand on 2 lakes and look at us before. But then it went away. I don't know why, but after he told me that, I felt really creepy all over. No one ever asked if anyone else had seen the same thing, so the rest of that camping trip was pretty boring. But I guess that place isn't too far from one of Pennsylvania's many Native American reservations. Almost makes me wonder if that has anything to do with what we saw. I mean, I hear people talk about skinwalkers and other strange Native American creatures. Maybe there's a link, maybe there isn't. Maybe this kid and I just happened to catch a rare species of deer that stands up straight. Even though it wasn't likely, it was still very, very scary. This happened in 1979 during a church retreat, or campout in a national forest in northern Minnesota. I didn't go to this church. I was there with about 45 people from the Baptist church, of all ages. Our camp was in the middle of nowhere, way out in the middle of nowhere. During the winter, you could only get there with a car that had 4-wheel drive or a snowmobile. The people I went with were split up into 3 different camps. There were about 15 people at my site, which had a couple of tents and a fire pit that we dug to use for cooking, keeping warm, and keeping the night air cool. Before everyone went to sleep, our campfire had died down quite a bit. Everyone went to sleep quickly in their own tents. We were all tired from the day's activities, which were mostly the same things you do at church retreats to help people work together. Everyone except me lay down in their tents. Because I was the youngest, I got to sleep in a tent with my mom and 3 other older women from church. I also remember going to sleep quickly that night. I woke up all of a sudden to what sounded like a big animal growling right outside my window. I woke up right away while I was still lying down and in the sleeping bag. I remember that when I looked around, everyone was still sleeping very soundly except for the people who stand watch. Around the fire pit, they were sitting. I think some of the older church beacons are right next to where we set up our tents. I don't know how long it took me to fall asleep again, but I do remember hearing another very loud one. This time, I sat up in my sleeping bag and looked out at the scary entrance. The fire in our campfire was pretty big, and it gave off a lot of light. I turned around quickly to see if anyone else heard what I had just heard. Was I making this up? I saw a few of the older beacons going to where the noise was coming from to see what was going on. I knew there were bears and other animals in this area, but I didn't think they could roar like this. After I saw them leave, I went back to my sleeping bag and laid back down, thinking that the problem would solve itself or something along those lines. No matter what an 8-year-old might think, I can quickly hear footsteps coming up to our tent when I'm lying down, so I sit up and respond right away. When the flap of our tent opens, it's one of the beacons who didn't bother to check out the noise. He looks as white as a sheet and tells us women to go back to our tents. There is a problem on camp right now. Stay in your tents until it's safe to come out. Only a few of the women, like my mom, woke up enough to even answer him. What do you mean by problem? They had asked him, are you sure? We're not sure either, but for now and everyone's safety, we're just going to make sure that no one leaves. If you needed to go to the bathroom, you should have told one of us after that. He closed the tent zipper, and I tried to roll over and go back to sleep, which I did in the end. Early in the morning, my mom woke me up by shaking me. We had to get up and start our day. The rest of the day went as usual. But I do remember that a lot of the older people in the church had worried looks on their faces and seemed to be worried about something. What? I'm not sure how often they talked quietly and in whispers among themselves. Well, I knew something was going on because I would sometimes look over at the smaller kids, which was basically me and a bunch of their kids at this point, but nobody would tell me that night. We were all sent to our tents to sleep for the night. We were all under 12 years old. It was only 7 o'clock. And it's still bright outside in the summer. I asked my mom, what's going on? Why must we go to sleep so early? She just told me that the adults have something special to do tonight, so we need to stay awake while the kids sleep so that we can get up early in the morning. She smiled, patted me on the head, kissed me, and then sent me to bed in the tent. This night, I stayed awake in my own tent because I was the only one in it. The adults sat around and talked quietly while I didn't sleep. There was no laughing, talking in a happy way, having a good time, smiling, or laughing. It seemed like there was something going on that we weren't supposed to know about. I remember that night in particular was a long one with a lot of noise. Well, I didn't hear any strange noises or roars like I did the night before. Still, it was hard not to have my mom with me in the tent or even just to have other people around. I didn't like being so far away from other people and not knowing what was going on. The following morning, my mom wakes me up the same way she did the day before. She shakes me awake and tells me, "Honey, we have to get all of our stuff because camp is getting cancelled early." It's being run by a sick pastor. At age 8, that was pretty much all she told me. I didn't think to push for more information or ask other questions. So, at that age, you just kind of go along with what's going on. I remember that we all packed up and left. But what's strange is that the church retreat was supposed to last 2 or 3 weeks, but it's already been 5 days. This was not the first retreat we went on, nor was it the only one. If I remember correctly, the first one we went to ended early. This makes me think about why they ended the retreat early. What did everyone yell about the other night? Where did they look? What did the grown-ups, elders, and deacons know that his children didn't? I never found out, which is a shame. Even when I was older and brought this event up, my mom still wouldn't talk about it. I don't know if she knew, how much she knew, or what she was told, but she seemed uncomfortable talking about it and would quickly change the subject or just not answer any questions I had. My mom died when she was 17 because she had breast cancer. I still never got answers. In 1988, my mother died of breast cancer. I am 51 years old now, and I still haven't gotten the answers I needed. But now that I'm an adult, I can tell you that there was something fishy going on out there that they didn't want the kids to know about. And now there are a lot of stories about dogma, Bigfoot, and other strange creatures and cryptids. I have a feeling that someone saw something and told the others. They did their best to protect us and the children, thinking that it would be best to stop retreating out of fear that this creature would attack someone. Even though it's just a guess, there's nothing else that makes sense. We hadn't really gone camping yet. But in 2005, my family and I went hiking in California's Sierra Nevada mountains. We were going to a place in the middle of nowhere that I can't remember the name of, but it was on a road not too far from the main road. I saw something that I'm not sure how to describe exactly. So I'll do my best to describe it as accurately as I can. I remember it was up in a tree, probably about 60 feet up, and it was far away. I thought it was a very big owl, but owls don't look at you like that. The closer I got, the more it looked like a small person sitting on all fours and holding onto a branch while looking at us. When I first saw it, I asked my girlfriend if someone had put some kind of stupid Halloween decoration in this tree. But when I saw his body and head move, I immediately gave up on that idea. because of the lighting and shading, I couldn't see exact details, but I could see the whole thing and how it moved and shifted. It moved very stiffly and like a machine. Even from that far away, I could tell that it was paying close attention to this. It had very big eyes, and it was just dark. I couldn't tell if it had hair or how big it was, but it looks like a crouched down person holding onto a branch. We were walking in the opposite direction of this thing, which was a little ways away, so we were getting closer to it. As we got closer, it actually started to hop from branch to branch. The same way a monkey moves quickly and nimbly while keeping a stiff body, if that makes any sense. Even though it moved like a monkey, it was not a monkey. California is not home to any monkeys or other primates. At least as far as I know. And from what I saw, this thing didn't have a tail, it wasn't swinging from branch to branch like an ape, it just jumped from branch to branch until it disappeared. Me and my girlfriend were the only ones who looked for it. It wasn't that hard to find, but I don't think anyone would have seen it if they hadn't been looking. And I only saw it because I happened to look up in that area and see something that didn't belong there. And the more we got close to it, the more strange it looked. Then, as we got closer, I think it noticed us and started to really move away from us. So, can I sit here and tell you what I saw 16 years ago? No, because I honestly don't know, but I can tell you that it was weird and I haven't seen anything like it since I went hiking in the Sierra Nevadas or anywhere else in California, for that matter. Even my girlfriend has no idea what to think about it. She thought it was really strange, so we didn't tell anyone else in our family and didn't talk about it much, but we still talk about it every once in a while. Just because the memory is so strange. When I was younger, I remember going to my uncle's cabin with my brother and older sister for a few weeks. He lived in the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest, which, if you're not familiar with the Pacific Northwest, is in the state of Washington around the Mount Helens area. Again, if you don't know about Mount Helen, it was the famous volcano that erupted in 1980 and shook the world. Now, the Gifford-Pinchot is a beautiful forest with lots of caves, tunnels, and caverns that have been there for thousands of years. There are also the well-known 8 caves, which are a very popular tourist attraction. The Pacific Crest Trail is also a popular place for tourists. But that's not all. The Gifford-Pinchot is not just a very thick, dense forest. It is also home to rivers, lakes, a lot of trout, coho, and Chinook salmon, and many other things. There are also mountain goats, bobcats, black bears, elk, and a lot of deer. There have even been a few sightings of Sasquatch in the area. So, as you can see, the Gifford-Pinchot is quite a place. When I was a kid, I spent a few weeks there at my uncle's house every June, when the forest was lush and full of overgrowth because it was the end of spring. My uncle lived in the middle of nowhere, but he wasn't a mountain man. He bought food, had electricity, and all that other stuff. He just lived way out in the country. My brother, sister, and I used to play in the woods all the time. As kids, it helped us feel better. Even now, just thinking about it makes me feel nostalgic. When my uncle's cabin was there weren't many yuppies or tourists. He had a lot of trails, including game trails, and we would walk on them all the time. We didn't step on them as much anymore. But there was one main trail that went from the back of my uncle's cabin deep into the woods. I don't think we ever reached the end of it because it went for miles, and I think at some point it connected to a river, a lake, or one of the more popular trails. I don't remember. I'd have to ask him about that. This happened a long time ago, but he always told us to never leave this trail. We didn't know why until one day, when we asked, he told us there were dangers ahead and we had to be careful. So one day, my brother, my sister, and I decided to go out on the same trail to see how far we could get. We might go about 2 or 3 miles before we turn around. At that age, I didn't really know how to judge distance, so I'm just guessing. So it's just a wild guess, but we walked for a few hours in one direction before turning around, and my oldest sister comes up with the idea. Listen, I know that our uncle told us not to go off the path, but what could he have meant by dangerous? Maybe we should see. My younger brother and I were easily swayed, so we thought it would be a good idea, and we went completely off the path and down into the thicket. We go down for maybe 30 minutes until we reach some blackberry bramble. Don't forget that in June, they aren't ready to eat yet. That won't happen until August. So, at this point, there are all those red, tiny blackberries that aren't ready to eat yet. So, we're trying to be very careful about where we go. Suddenly, my sister stops us and tells us to listen. She says that we can hear a voice calling all of our names, and she gives me a very serious look. I'll never forget her face. Are you listening? I remember telling her. I turned to look at my brother. He was very scared. It was her uncle's voice, but the way we came was where it should have been coming from. The deeper part of the forest was on the way we were going. Another thing was that it sounded like him, but not exactly like him. I'm not sure how to explain it. Just that it was different. Someone might have been trying to sound like him, so it was calling all of her names and asking us to come here. We could tell it wasn't too far away, but this immediately scared me, my brother, and my sister, and it was my sister who brought it up first. Guys, we need to go back. I just have a bad feeling about it. We didn't want to fight. We turned around quickly and were back on the trail in about 15 minutes. By the time we got back to the trail, we no longer heard the voice calling our names. We thought it might be a good idea to take a break and head back to the cabin, just in case that voice was really my uncle and the sound of the forest was making him sound funny and making it hard to tell where he was coming from. We thought that was more likely than someone actually imitating him out there. So we go back to where he lives. Most likely, it's between 3 and 4 p.m. and he was waiting for us outside while he smoked his tobacco pipe. He looks at us all and says, "You guys didn't listen, did you? We didn't even talk to each other." He just gets up from his rocking chair and starts to yell at us like we're little kids. "I told you three not to be afraid to go down that path. You didn't listen to me? You're lucky." It could have gone bad very quickly, but it didn't. What did you see? We didn't say anything, but my sister told my uncle that we thought we heard your voice. But it's hard to tell because we heard you further into the forest and he cut her off before she could finish her sentence. You listen to me. Good. None of you. No matter what time it is, I don't care. What I say doesn't matter. Do I make myself clear? Neither of you will go back out on that trail for the rest of your time here. We were afraid, too, so we nodded. We never bothered to ask him what it was or what was on the trail or beyond the trail. He seemed angry and firm about his choice. But as a child, I'm not sure if you have the ability to think deeply about these things and really think about them as an adult. I think about the past and wonder what he knew that was wrong. We kids were in so much danger. He must have known something, for sure. He saw or heard something that made him realize it wasn't safe. But if that's true, why did he even let us follow the trail? Nothing makes much sense. We don't really talk to him much anymore, so I'll have to ask him. But if I could get in touch with him, I would try to find out what I could and let you know.